I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we would like to welcome Guy Hendrix Dyas to our film production design panel for Netflix's Maria. So, Guy, this marks your third collaboration with director Pablo Larraín, and I kind of want to start right there. What keeps you coming back to his films?
Uh, well, at this point, you can imagine we're quite good friends. Um, but it all really started with sort of a chance meeting that was sort of set up by Darren Aronofsky, a mutual friend of ours, and Darren, who I've known for years. Um, but I think basically suggested I might be a good match for Pablo. So it's all Darren's fault, really. It's what I keep telling him anyway. But really, I think the wonderful thing about Pablo is there's such a purity to his filmmaking. I mean, we're talking about a filmmaker who will literally uh, give up everything to make sure his vision is on the screen. There's no sort of creature comforts or things that he needs in any way, shape, or form if it's going to take away from something that he can put on the screen in order to help tell his story and obviously respect Stephen Knight's script. So I think I just have a huge professional respect for him, and of course his amazing talent, the
Mm.
way he is with actors as a production designer. You know, you're often on set and you watch interactions between your director and their actresses or actors, and you know, generally speaking, they're pretty damn good. But Pablo seems to have a very special uh, ability to take his performers to places they've never been before. And
Mm.
because I tend to do a lot of the standby as well for Pablo, which means I'm on set all the time, I get to witness that on a daily basis. It's really something quite extraordinary.
Mm. And Angelina Jolie plays Maria Callas, one of the great opera singers of the 20th century. What was Angelina like behind the scenes? She seems like such a dedicated actress who is just so in love with the craft.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to think, to be honest. When I first met Angie, I'm sure like a lot of people, I was probably, you know, a little reserved and wondered how she was going to be. But she was so warm, so just down to earth and human. There was not a bone of pretension in her body.
Mm.
Highly intelligent, extremely well read on Maria, to the point where we had at least one interaction where she corrected me on a technicality, which I was extremely impressed with when it came to actors' involvement in their own research. And also her sheer dedication. I mean, I've already mentioned how Pablo is masterful at, I think, encouraging a sort of an inner strength or a sort of a boldness in his actors to go a little further than perhaps they would. But he and Angie together really made an extremely intelligent, dynamic duo. They just kept pushing and pushing and pushing this character to places that went even beyond Stephen Knight's extraordinary script.
Mm.
So, but on a day-to-day basis, she was just absolutely wonderful, very gracious, very complimentary about the work that was going on, and generally just all in, which is what you want, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And a lot of the movie takes place on location in Paris, a lot of exterior shots. And what difficulties did you have scouting some of these locations and building some of these sets?
Well, traditionally, for those filmmakers that have shot in Paris, and I'm not talking about the ones that are naturally French, you'll be aware that there are some special golden weeks during the year where you ideally want to shoot Paris, and that's the summer holiday for the
Mm.
Parisians, because they all leave the city and leave you alone to get on with your business. That was the good fortune that I had when working with Christopher Nolan on Inception. When we shot in Paris, we got into Paris when nobody was there. So we were obviously able to blow up that sort of cafe, as you may recall from the film,
Mm.
in slow mo. Uh, we didn't have that luxury. We were actually there in Paris in the late summer. It wasn't quite the fall. We wanted it to be the fall because that was the spirit of the film, and of course the timing of when Maria sadly passed in 1977. But we were there in late summer, and of course it was the Rugby World Cup. So we had all these crazy, Australians and Kiwis and Brits running around, and we had to deal with that huge world sporting event while trying to maintain a sort of a very cool and collected 1977 facade of Paris. It was extremely hard, I have to say.
Well, it seems like you pulled it off on camera. So whatever difficulties you had behind the scenes, those, we can't tell as viewers.
And of course, with a film like Pablo's, there are limited resources for visual effects. We do have visual effects, and they're very, very good, but they are quite limited. So every single shot counts in terms of what you can do in front of the camera. That certainly we had several locations that were stretching at least, I would say, there's a beautiful opening shot, I think, where Maria steps into a line of trees. I don't know if you recall this, it's in the trailer. And all the leaves under the trees, myself and a couple of helpers laid down with bags. We just put all these leaves down within about half an hour. We were exhausted in order to promote that idea that it was the fall. It was autumn.
The tricks of movie making.
Right.
So you actually did get to visit the real life apartment where Maria once lived. What was it like stepping foot into that space?
Quite eerie. Obviously, Pablo and I generally, and we did this, of course, on Spencer, we tried to do our own sort of, I suppose, tour of places where our subject would have been or gone or favored to go as a restaurant or a place. And so we sort of tread in Maria's footsteps all over Paris. It was a glorious couple of weeks of research, but we failed to get into that apartment. And on the last day, I remember we finally twisted somebody's arm. I don't want to dig too deep as to how that happened. And we were able to gain access to this extraordinary place on Georges Mendel, Avenue Georges Mendel's. And it was amazing. You could see the Eiffel Tower, obviously, from what we believe was her bedroom. It might have very well been one of the last things she saw. This is my theory anyway. But if you look at the lovely black and white photographs, which you'll find, all over the internet or on books on Maria, photographic books, famous poses that she would sort of regularly put together. For example, her in front of her marble fireplace. I got to touch and look at the original marble fireplace. The office that she had, where you often saw her interviewed, sitting on a couch, surrounded by sort of her favorite paintings or awards that she'd received. She'd often get interviewed privately in that part of her house. And we got to look at the more, or rather the less publicized areas, her kitchen, for example, which of course we had to recreate in all its 70s glory. And some of the more private areas, private parlors. We saw what we thought was the dressing room. Obviously, in full disclosure, I completely turned what the dressing room really was into a sort of a theatrical setting, which felt as though it helped with Pablo's vision of sort of wavering between reality and fantasy, as he often does in his films. But it was a really amazing experience. We were not allowed to take photographs, so I had to very, very quickly, in my sketchbook, jot down a plan of the site in order to recreate that later.
And the piano is a big set piece in the movie, and the vanity where she puts on her makeup. How authentic do you think these were to the original pieces?
Well, the piano was exactly what she would have had. We had a real Steinway, but we also had to make a thin Steinway because, of course, our doorways didn't accommodate moving the piano on its wheels by her her butler, Ferrucco, couldn't fit through those doors. Normally, you would take a piano apart, tip it up on its end. So we had to make a special thin piano, which I was always very frightened if
Mhm.
Pablo and Ed didn't shoot from the right angle, you'd see that it was ultra thin. But I think we sort of get away with it. So we had a couple of pianos to pull that trick off. Um, the mirror was a complete uh, fabrication, really. I think Pablo and I had been looking at the classic, theatrical mirror with the light bulbs that go around the edge. And both he and I were sort of a bit feeling as though that had been done to death in numerous films. And he said to me, is there anything else out there that we could use? And I said, well, I had seen a picture of Maria in the Chicago, one of the Chicago venues where she was sitting in a mirror and it had those amazing sort of can lights, those tin lights. Um, and he said, oh, well, why don't we use those? And I said, well, you don't mind stretching the truth? And he said, not at all. I think it's still in the flavor of Maria. So I
Mhm.
ended up drawing a pencil sketch of that. And that's ultimately what we built. So it was a complete build. I should point out the circular mirror came out so we could achieve those reverse shots looking at
Mhm.
Maria's face and her butler over her shoulder.
Well, Guy, you've been nominated twice at the Oscars for Passengers and for Inception, and our fingers are crossed for you and for the film. It's such a beautiful piece of art, and we're hoping
Very
that
kind.
enough people and enough voters watch it and remember it when it comes time to voting time. So thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.